Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We'll just give it another minute or so for folks to roll in and then we can get started. In the meantime, Melba's dropped a link to our kind of agenda and minutes document in the chat. So if you could send your name there as an attendee, and if you've got any topics, please feel free to add them.
Hey everyone. Thank you everyone who already started the meeting notes and registered attendance. If you haven't already, please remember to do so. I'll paste a link in the chat for convenience. We're having a good crowd today. First, want to welcome any new members who'd like to say hi, if we have any. I don't think I recognize almost everyone. Okay, well, if you want to chime in, go for it. We'd love to say hi. Joshua, I think you have the first issue topic.
Yes, we talked about this a bit on some of the issue comments earlier today, but there's an issue open number 900 about releasing a 1.1 release and some related discussion on PR 892, which is about clarifying that the specification text is kind of the authoritative definition of the spec, and the different schema formats are informative. I think we've come to a consensus that we should do a version bump, because even though the specification text arguably hasn't changed, we are informing the reader that an assumption that they may have made may need to be reevaluated, right? So I think there's a strong reason to have a 1.1 release, and I wanted to bring that to the group and discuss whether there are other things we should include. I would advocate for doing the release relatively quickly, and I also wanted to discuss the build system changes that were SLSA proposal number 6, and whether we should wait for those before we do another release effectively. So sorry, quite a lot of points there, but Mark, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, just to clarify, my comment on 892, that's the canonical one thing,
Yeah.
was about a patch release as opposed to a minor release. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do a minor release, but I literally meant just calling it 1.0.1. That just to clarify what my comment was.
That's a great clarification, because I couldn't find, I seem to remember us talking about full sender versioning in the past and deciding that patch releases didn't make sense, because we were going to not want to do that for every clarification to the spec, and we only wanted to bump version when we were making like a feature change, for want of a better term, because that's the sender terminology. And I kind of personally went back and forth on, was this a feature change or not? And I fell on the my position I kind of concluded was that because this may cause a reader to reinterpret things, that we should signal that somehow, and the version number is the best way we have to signal that. But I was thinking minor rather than patch, because I thought we'd ruled out patches.
Yeah, I get sorry for my confusing comment. I meant literally, if we choose not to do a minor release and we add and like one every time we actually make an issue for this rather than like a random comment buried in one of the pull requests. Every time we do, now that we have the or we soon will have, I guess we technically have the commit convention for like we classify commit or pull requests as either like content or editorial or blah blah blah. Anything with a content, which is like the most highest priority one, would require a release notes. And if we have any such changes where we change to something after release, if we're already doing that, would it be worthwhile just calling it a patch release in the notes? Maybe not. Maybe that would just be confusing or not worth the trouble. Just like, what is the convention for, like we did, maybe a date would actually probably be more useful than actually probably a date is more useful. But either way, like some sort of something so people could follow along, like, oh, I looked at 1.0 last time and it said this. It doesn't recall, I don't remember it saying this, and then we have someplace to look. I guess that is slightly orthogonal to, should we not do that in this case, and should we bundle them up into a minor release?
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I think it is somewhat related, and maybe we need to capture this discussion in our conventional commits related documentation. But I had assumed that spec content would mean a minor or major version number increment would be required, and that spec editorial were effectively patch releases, and that we had kind of agreed in the past not to make patch releases. But yeah, I can see an argument for wanting to be able to check one's own sanity. Am I misremembering what I read? But I think like we have a public Git repository, and we try to be fairly detailed about encouraging folks to have good pull request messages and things. So I'm not sure that we need to go to the extent of creating a changelog for all of the spec editorial and non-spec kind of patch changes. That's my thoughts. I'd love to have someone convince me otherwise if they feel strongly about it.
Chris?
Joshua's understanding matches mine, that content would be major, minor, and editorial is effectively patch, but we don't have patch releases. I mean, we can add them, it's easy enough. Just that's just a non-spec change.
I see. Yeah, I had not assumed that, so we should be explicit about that. So then, okay, any other thoughts? I'd be interested to hear other thoughts too. Go for it.
I think we agreed. So I think one of the reasons that patch release doesn't necessarily make sense is that I don't think we want to keep like published versions of the spec for each patch increment. At which point the number.
Yeah, to be clear, I was not suggesting that we'd actually publish. You'd be able to easily view an old patch release. It would be like the Python docs, where like you could view every minor release, but it's always the latest patch of that. So anyway, I'm not necessarily trying to argue for that, but just that was kind of my thinking. Yeah, Andrew.
Sorry, I'm trying to take this to my car, so I apologize for the noise. I feel like if there's any spec changes, whether it's content or editorial, it warrants a changelog, a release notes. But I would say that for editorial, it shouldn't require a version change because there's nothing that's actually changing. So not until there's content should a version, like the minor version, at least be bumped. But make sure that if there's any changes to the specification pages, that change is made aware, so that it can be tracked in order to help that discovery of, oh, there might be clarity in this place, or there might be clarity in another place.
And Andrew, are you advocating for that being an explicit content on the website rather than just the Git commit log that exists?
Can you repeat that?
Are you suggesting that the Git logs are insufficient for that purpose?
Git logs might be helpful, but I think that some way of being able to surface it through salsa.dev would be beneficial, and a release notes or a change log would be helpful. So if you have a editorial change that is introduced, you can put it on there, but not tied to a version. And then once there's a minor version bump, then it can be associated with a version. But until there's that minor version bump, it would be associated with whatever latest is.
Cool. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think the it would. I actually hadn't been thinking about putting editorial stuff in the changelog, but I think you're right, because like what we consider editorial or not is kind of a blurry line. And so if you go to read something, it's like, oh, it doesn't read like I have. It's the first. If it's clear to readers that they can look in the changelog and see changes, it might make it easier. We could talk about exactly how best to represent that, but I do think something that's on the website, either on a single page or at like the bottom of each page, ideally well, I'm not sure ideally. There's nice aspects to auto-generating it, where like it would be maybe just the title of every pull request. Like if we have good titles of pull requests, if we have titles and then a link to the pull request where you could see the actual diff, that might be nice. And because if we continue to follow this conventional commits, which I think is great, by the way, then we could filter out and only do things that are, editorial or higher. And that way it filters out noise. Because I think the commit log in GitHub in the past certainly was unreadable, and now should be cleaner up now that we're doing the squash. But it's still kind of hard to read, and so having it on the website, I think, is much more user-friendly.
I think it's a cleaner kind of separation of duties, so to speak, with the GitHub project and Git being the the implementation piece that we focus on. But then if users see a changelog on the website, that kind of matches that being the user presentation layer, and sure, it might bounce them through to GitHub to see the diff if they want to see exactly what changed, but it feels like a clearer boundary between the tool and the output this way.
So to clarify, I think what we're saying is if I don't know if anyone has read the conventional commits thing, but the standard terms are, I think, feat, short for feature, and anything that is like a minor release, I think. Is that true? And then they also have bug, which I think in our case would be editorial. I think it kind of maps somewhat well to editorial. And then you could have other stuff, and there's like conventional commits talks about kind of auto-generating things, and something kind of there's like, like this is just a doc, it's not like hard coded, but I think we could have something like, every editorial and above gets a changelog entry, and everything, which is equivalent to maybe a patch release, and everything that's content or above requires a minor release, and we'll have to figure out how we do the version management, and that comes back to the next bullet. And then they have some way of saying a breaking change, which would require a major release. But we haven't gotten there yet.
Just a question: if we do minor releases, do we have that? I remember when we did the draft of the 1.0, there were 2 weeks latency on having the change in. And do we have that for minor release or not?
I think that's a good question. Honestly, I had not anticipated doing that. I was thinking of that like review period being more for the major releases, but I'm not opposed to doing them for minor.
Yeah, I think it would make sense if we to be more agile on that way, not to wait each time for 2 weeks if we have to push stuff. But I don't know what our the status are here for SLSA.
A lot of the desire for having that 2-week period initially is because 1.0 was quite a significant change from the initial release, where a lot of attention had been on the project. You know, people were still talking about some of the requirements from 0.1, even after we had removed them from the kind of draft releases of 1.0. So we wanted to have a period where we tried to get some of those folks to come back and look at the spec and provide feedback to make sure that the major changes we had made were still going to be useful for them. But
yeah, understood.
Yeah.
It's also in the community specification license. The 2-week thing is, as far as I understand, for patents, like the contributors grant a royalty-free blah, 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 something or other for released versions, or I think, what's it called? Approved versions or something like that, but not necessarily for intermediate draft versions. But it seems like it's really written around, like, there's a spec, and like an IETF spec that's written once, and maybe it's written, you know, an update, but it's like a big heavyweight, like not like a rolling release like we have. So I feel like it's not actually a great fit. I think we should bring this up with whoever in Linux Foundation to make sure that, you know, I want to make sure that we're following we're doing the right thing from the license perspective.
Yeah, I think the community specification license is the default license in the OpenSSF for non-software projects. So we can certainly, connect back with the OpenSSF, possibly via the TAC, to evaluate the fit and see if that's still the right way forward.
So we could talk about like the mechanics of exactly how we do it. I think that's easy to do offline and have a proposal, we could iterate on it. One thing that I think it's worth discussion now is, like, for minor releases, how big should they be and how frequent should they be? So the things that we're talking about to possibly include in a release, like this one is like just clarifying which is authoritative. It's not really a major change. The VSA one is changing some required fields to optional, but it's not a major change. I don't know if there were other ones. And ultimately with the version numbers, we're using this as a communication mechanism, right? Because there's kind of a balance. Any thoughts on that? Like, is it better to just not do the minor release to not have noise, or is it better to do more minor releases to have a clear kind of protocol for when breaking changes happen?
So I can jump in and just reiterate that I think it's better to have the communication mechanism, and semantic versioning convention is if there's not a breaking, like if you're introducing new functionality, but it's in a backward compatible way, that's when you get the minor version number increment. And that feels like what we're doing, certainly with the changes we've discussed here. And because they are not backwards incompatible, if someone has implemented SLSA 1 and we've then pushed SLSA 1.1 and they choose not to implement it, that should be okay. So I think, yeah, I know my preference would be to do the minor version numbers just to signify that we've made some like non-trivial changes.
See, Marcel said yes. Chris?
I'm also in favor of doing the minor release relatively soon. I think the question is there anything coming up that we would want to batch into it? And does it make sense to say we won't do minor releases more than like, I don't know, once a month, once a quarter, that sort of thing? Because I wonder if having minor versions doesn't create noise. Having them unexpectedly creates noise, perhaps.
Yeah, I think trying to batch them up so that we're only making them periodically does make a lot of sense. And I think even quarterly would be, kind of sufficient. Like none of the changes that we're making right now are earth-shattering. They're just nice. For the most part, they're nice to have. So saying we'll do that a quarter after, or we'll do that within the quarter after the initial 1.0 release, and then we'll not make another similar release for another quarter. I can see the appeal in that.
I'm fine with that most quarterly. So in terms of, feel free to steer the discussion a different way if you want to talk about something else. So Tianyu is on leave. Tianyu is the one who wrote did you link to it from here? The branch strategy thing. Originally in this meeting, we had talked about like developing on a branch and then building that into a website. Tianyu looked into it, kind of did the proposal, and that would, there's pros and cons. Oh yeah, thanks, Joshua. It would make contributing a little bit harder because you have to like submit to the branch and then the building. I'm not too worried about the implementation because like maintainers could just write that and only a couple people need to understand it. But I'm more worried about the contribution process and like the barriers to entry. And the original proposal was that we develop on a branch and then merge it into like main or something like that. And then there was concerns about like complexity there. And so where we landed was we'll just build on main. I'm sorry, we just contribute on main to version directories like we have now. And then you could kind of use some sort of get something or other subtree or something like that to build like the actual kind of infer the real history from the merge thing, which is kind of weird. But that was assuming that we're not going to have very many like of these kind of patch changes. But we already have like 3 in flight, I think, 2 or 3 in flight, where we would have to, in order to do that, we'd have to create the version directory. And so I wonder if we should, any thoughts there on like what's a good way for doing version management here, Joshua?
When I skimmed the proposal earlier when I was thinking about this, it talked about having a branch for a release. So I could see, having, I don't know if it makes sense to, we could choose a granularity at which to published versions of the spec, and have a branch track at that version granularity. And so I think you could decide, that's an option, I guess. I'd be curious to hear from others who are less involved in the sausage making and have a bit more of a consumer perspective, whether there's value in seeing, for example, all of the minor releases listed on salsa.dev or not. So yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on what level of release granularity you'd like to be able to see through the website, or Andrew. Andrew, you're really unclear.
Push to whatever the branch is. I'm sure I'll try it one moment.
Yeah, Andrew, you're breaking up a lot. I don't think anyone can really hear what you're saying.
Yeah, he said he was in his car before, so maybe
Yeah.
there's no signal. Oh, and it looks like he dropped entirely, so I think it's a signal problem. Hopefully we'll get him back.
So I think, is it fair to say, Mark, your concern is having a bunch of directories in the top level for each minor release, for example?
Yeah, I keep basically it's one of those things where you look at one and you're like, oh no, that's bad. I'm gonna go over here, and you're like, oh no, that's bad, and you keep looking, then you circle. You just keep going in a circle because none of the options look very good. Yeah, my concern with the status quo is the version directories. That when someone wants to contribute, like the VSA one, for example, or the one that you just sent, the 892. You naturally would do it for the current thing. We decide, oh no, this requires a minor version bump. And then what do? Then we don't have a two things. One, we don't have a 1.1 directory yet. And two, we don't have, and it's not proposed to have a latest thing. And so in order to see that new version, there's nowhere to view it, which we could do, but we need to change what's currently in the proposal.
Yeah.
Andrew, are you back now?
Yeah, let me try again. Right before I get home, there's always a big hole. So what I perceive as being a simpler form, and I obviously missed a lot of the conversation, but if we just have people contribute towards the default branch towards main, and then we have release branches, then whenever we decide that we have reached that quarterly moment of doing a minor version bump or something like that, then we can just batch and cherry pick all the relevant commits to whatever the branch is, and then you'd still use main to track whatever the latest is. And so then the burden wouldn't be on contributors, the burden would be on the maintainers to ensure that we have appropriate updates of the versions. And so you would have, I think that even if you have a branch per major version, then once you get to your quarterly minor or your monthly minor version, just cherry pick everything over and update that the branch tracking that main, or tracking that main version.
I think Nicola was first.
Okay, maybe what we can, I don't know if it was discussed before, but having, so using main for contribution, knowing that most contributions are not on the website or stuff related to the web, but on the spec contents. So we keep the spec there and have a special branch for the website. There is only one website that will list the stuff we want to publish, the branch we want to publish, basically. So there will be a special branch for the website and then main branch for amending the specs and the SLSA framework that we branch each time we do a release, minor or major. And we can decide on the web branch which stuff we want to publish, and we can adjust with time.
So I didn't quite follow. You're saying there would be one. I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow. You're saying there's one branch per major version? I'm sorry.
Each time we do release, we do branch, but we keep a separate branch for the website because in the end we have several branches, but we have only one website that will hold all the published stuff. So you put a GitHub action on the web branch, and
so like the main branch would be like auto merged from all the version branches. Are you saying?
Yeah, the web branch will do a checkout of all the branch you need to publish, basically, and we can automate that probably. I don't know if I'm clear enough.
Brandon?
I would say for simplicity, unless you're planning on going back and applying hot patches to previously released branches out there, then I wouldn't do a branch per release. I would just do a tag. And then the next time we need to do another release, we're just doing a tag with the next current version.
Yeah, backporting actually is my, I guess, implicitly my concern that like if we have an editorial change, we I think probably want that to go, well, I guess we could make a decision like, do we just leave the text as is and do quarter releases and just batch all of the changes until next quarter release? I think if we do that, it becomes simple. We just have a thing, we use tags, auto build it, it's straightforward. So thanks for calling this out. I was assuming, possibly incorrectly, that we would want to have some changes go live right away and some hold until the next release. So like anything editorial and below, style changes, etc., we want them to go out right away. But then anything with the content tag, which would require a patch release, we'd want to like have in some separate holding area and not be live on like say the 1.0 directory, but is visible on some like 1.x directory, and then that gets batched, but like there's some cherry picking, merging, something or other going on. But maybe that's too complex. Yeah, Joshua.
I just wanted to say that my assumption matched yours, which is that we would have some changes just go live straight away because they didn't really impact the implementation effectively, and that it would only be content changes. I think it's the right tag that would be batched. I'm trying to think whether having a branch per major version would, and then like tagging the minor version releases would help be a compromise between having too many directories and being really messy or not. And I'm not sure, honestly. So unfortunately, I'm beginning to think we need to go back to the drawing board a bit with proposal 6 and experiment with different options, because it's hard to reason about.
I'm just updating the meeting notes to try to capture what we're talking about. And anyone, please edit meeting notes because I'm trying to talk and type at the same time, and I'm horrible at that.
But thanks for doing that. I want to. I feel like we've probably hit the logical conclusion of that discussion, unless anyone else has strong opinions. It feels like we are agreeing that we want to make a minor release, a batch minor release soon for a 1.1 for the changes that are in flight now, and that we recognize that we probably need to rethink proposal 6 as a consequence of this idea of batching minor releases once per quarter or so. Okay. Shall we use the remaining time to do issue triage? Chris, are you okay to lead that one?
Yeah. Ooh. Let's try that. Sorry. We've got quite a few this time. So let's start with 891. That's discussion on verifying package names. So there's been a lot of discussion on this issue already, but I think a rough summary is that due to a quirk in the way that NPM handles package names, it's possible to install a package and verify its provenance, but have the package installed under a different name than you expect. I know, Mark, you've been active on this issue. Does that sound like a fair summary? Actually, a lot of us have been active on this issue. Joshua, too.
Chris, assuming you're looking at these issues now, do you want to share your screen?
Yes. Just a moment. Figure that out.
I think I would summarize. Yeah, I think I would agree with your summary of the issue. Effectively, you can download an NPM package to install offline, but if you do that, it's up to the person who downloaded it to, well, anyone can rename the package, and the concern is that the package name that you install might not match the provenance metadata and the name in the package JSON file inside the tarball. But as if I'm following things correctly, the name of the tarball that you install affects the install location effectively, so you can give it a false name.
Yeah. There's basically when in NPM and maybe other ecosystems, the name is, there's two different, look, the name is in two places. One is the artifact itself contains its own name, and the tooling that does the package installation gets a name from some external source, like the user running npm install blah. And some things like npm don't actually make sure that they both match. And if they don't match, if it doesn't give an error, one will win. And so the question is, for the SLSA verifier tool, which name should it be checking against? My feeling is that, well, I guess there's the question about what should the specification say and what should the SLSA verifier tool actually do? Because that's just one implementation. My feeling is that this, well, I mean, because this comes up, like the spec, it would be good to have this clear in the spec of like, that this is a thing. I wonder if maybe it makes sense to almost have like an annotated rulings or something like that, where you kind of talk about cases that come up that are not necessarily like, you don't need to know for the spec, or it's almost like a frequent asked questions kind of thing. My feeling here is that there exists one name for real, like the packet, like when you go to install a package, one is going to win, and that is what you should compare against. And if there's any sort of discrepancy, that's a kind of a tooling problem. But I guess maybe it would be useful for the spec to be note that such a thing can come up, if that makes sense. So for example, the SLSA verifier tooling, Ian said down below, like when you go to invoke it on a package, all you have is a tarball, so you don't know the other name, like you don't know what someone typed on the command line. And my feeling is that is a tooling problem because it ought to be integrated into the NPM tooling. And so that's kind of an implementation gap as opposed to like some fundamental like SLSA spec thing. So I wouldn't, that's anyway how my feeling is, but do other folks have thoughts?
My thought on the matter was that one of the expectations that I think users would have is that there's one name for the package. And so to me, it makes sense that if it makes sense to, in the SLSA verifier, to also verify that expectation that there's one package name that makes sense. If you just have a tarball, there is only one package name, but if you download from the npm registry, there's potentially two different names, one from the registry and one from the tarball that's contained, that's downloaded. And so if the provenance, like I feel like if the provenance is installing some kind of artifact, or if the provenance is indicating the installation of the dependency of some kind of artifact that has a potential for a name mismatch, then it seems like a reasonable expectation for the SLSA verifier to enforce that expectation, just so that anybody else who depends on it would be aware of the violation of or the confirmation of that expectation.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Andrew in that it's effective, like it's one of those areas where the specification says there should be an agreement in the ecosystem, and SLSA verifier it becomes part of the ecosystem in this, so there has to be some expectation set somewhere. And it's kind of unappealing because as SLSA verifier is trying to be a generic tool, hopefully it grows to support multiple ecosystems, and if it has to hard code a bunch of assumptions about how to work around gaps in the upstream flow, that could get quite unwieldy. But that feels, that to me is the challenging part of this. But Lauren, I should let you speak because you're much more deeply involved in this.
Well, thanks. No, I wanted to also mention something else, which is like the So I think the publish attestation is not yet part of SLSA, which I think complicates a little bit the discussion, because like today we have SLSA provenance, but we don't talk about publish attestation, and the package name is only really relevant when you do like publish attestation verification. Although the package name also is mentioned in the provenance itself, but I think it's just I don't think it's really a claim from the registry at that point. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that I wonder whether there are also two cases in terms of verification. There's, if you trust the registry, can you just verify the publish attestation and not verify what's inside the tarball? Versus if you're trying to verify the same way that the registry should verify. For example, if you have a network of other entities that are trying to keep the registry honest and do the same verification, then in that case, it clearly makes sense to verify consistency in the tarball versus what's in the what the publish attestation is claiming. So I wonder whether that makes a difference or not in practice. Even though I kind of agree that if we want verification to work for everyone, even before the registry fixes the problem, we might also want to verify it in all the two cases that I'm mentioning. I'm not sure if that makes clear what I'm saying. I see Mark and Chris have their hands raised.
I don't see how publish attestations are relevant here. Like in my mind, and maybe I'm thinking too abstractly, but like from the purposes of a user, you go to install a package, and it, in practice, in the npm kind of like thing on your machine, gets installed with a name. And you will, in code, refer to it by that name, or you will execute scripts or whatever by that name. And kind of by installing it with a given name, you're conferring the privileges of that name. Like you're using, say, _JS in your project, and you're calling it _JS and referring to it. Or if this is like a Debian install, you are calling something bash, and it's giving the name, user bin bash, and that denotes some sort of privilege. And so that is the thing that you should be comparing against expectations. So like, what do I expect bash to be? Under the hood, if there are like publish attestations or like whether or not you trust the registry, seems like a little bit, I'm not saying it shouldn't be in the spec, because it clearly comes up, but like it seems like it's kind of more of an implementation thing. Yeah. I think Chris was next.
Yeah, I don't see how the publish attestation fits in here. If you trust the registry, then the registry should probably be issuing a VSA, and you verify the VSA. And if you don't trust the registry, I don't understand why you care about the publish attestation. Like you're installing from a local tarball that you have provenance for, the registry has kind of nothing to do with that, I would think.
Mark, I think that early on in the issue, I had a similar viewpoint as you were describing, because I was coming at this from the build platform's perspective. If you have a build platform that is capable of understanding the dependencies that are pulled in by the builds and includes that in the provenance, then it would, I mean, in most situations, it might use the npm registry for mentioning or for identifying those dependencies. So from a build platform, I think that the build platform itself is capable of understanding the provenance that it generates. But then what Ian commented on it is that part of the issue during SLSA verification is that they have the tarball and not a package name. So it seems like the issue is on the verification side. They don't have the metadata that's in the npm registry. And so if the build platform uses that metadata that's in the npm registry, whether that's the publication attestation or whatnot, there's still the possibility that there's going to be a mismatch, because maybe the build platform uses that metadata which the verification doesn't use, and so you're going to have you're not going to be able to verify the provenance that's generated.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. Is I think maybe what would make sense for the spec is to say more explicitly that you can't, well, I'm going to say something controversial. I'm not sure if everyone here will agree. You can't verify an artifact, which is just a file or blob of data. You have to verify an artifact, comma, resource or URI or some package name, I think, some package identifier pair, because you are expecting this artifact to match the expectations of this resource name. And it happens to be that some packages have the name embedded in the artifact, and maybe you could extract that, like NPM packages happen to have the name, and tooling might be able to kind of auto do it so you don't have to pass in both explicitly. But it sounds like that is the case here, that like it's with the automatic thing, and sometimes the automatic thing doesn't work. I'd be interested in thoughts on that, but Laura also had his hand up as well.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to reply to what Chris said about, like, he said the registry has nothing to do with if you have a local tarball. I guess maybe we didn't explain the issue well, but when you install, you can download the tarball from the registry. So the registry is involved. So you can download the tarball, and then you can download the attestations, which include the provenance and the publish attestation. And so the registry is involved. It has a policy that says that the registry accepted that tarball and it maps to that package. And I think Chris also mentioned VSA. The publish attestation is very similar. It basically gives you the package name, which is the equivalent of the resource URI in a VSA. So the registry is still involved. Yeah, that's all.
So I'm not clear that we have a conclusion other than perhaps we should have a list of applied rulings on the website. Is there a consensus on what the ruling should be in this case?
I wish I said like some sort of separate applied ruling here. After this discussion, I think clarifying in like the how to verify section, I think actually doing it there might be good. What do you, at a high level, I have to write the details. What do you all think about being more explicit about you need to verify on like you don't verify an artifact alone, you always verify an artifact and a package name. And like kind of talk more about the mechanics of how you look up, without being prescriptive about how you look up the thing based on effectively keyed by the package name, and talk about the special case of things like NPM where the name is embedded in it.
Laurent, did you have your hand up first, or is that remaining? So I think what you described, Mark, makes sense, because we have documentation on this within SLSA already that says, like, you don't just verify an artifact, you verify an artifact with its provenance against a set of expectations. So I think we're narrowing in on being able to describe some more about what some of the like expectations that must be set are. And I think that makes sense, that we can provide more clarity and use the NPM example to provide further insights. So I agree with your proposal. And I guess just filling a bit of the silence, we have the terminology page has a verification model, description and diagram, as well as the verifying artifacts page. So it feels like we could add something or make sure that we're not, when we add something to address this, we should make sure it's reflected in both of those places.
All right, does this comment I have on the screen look like a reasonable summary of the action items?
I would also add that I would say more explicitly that I have a wording in the meeting notes if you want to copy that.
Got it, okay. Okay.
Looks good.
I'm
And
not 100% sure that that addresses all the concerns, but I feel like that's good to do either way. But I'm hoping that that'll get us closer to resolution.
okay, then let's wait for feedback on the issue, and I'll leave it on the new list to come back to next week. And we're out of time, so we'll leave the rest of the backlog there too. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Well,